Hi, everyone. Welcome to Taking a Fresh Look at After-School Suppers, hosted by the Food Research and Action Center. I'm Steve Hayward, FRAC's Communications Manager. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 60 minutes. We are recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides in a follow-up email. Closed captioning is available. To turn captions on, select Show Captions in the bottom taskbar. At the end of the presentation, there will be time for questions and answers. To ask a question, please use the Q&A tab, also in the bottom taskbar. With that, I'll pass it off to Clarissa Hayes, Deputy Director of School and Out-of-School Time Programs at FRAC.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on taking a fresh look at after-school suppers. Like Steve mentioned, my name is Clarissa Hayes, and I will be moderating today's webinar on behalf of FRAC. And I just want to say that we are so glad that you could take time out of your busy days to join us today. So as summer wraps up across the country, now is the time to start thinking about either starting or expanding an after-school meal program at your school or community location. These meals are especially important as students spend more and more time in after-school programs and activities across the country. With school lunch able to start as early as 10 a.m., after-school snacks and suppers provide a key opportunity to support students while also drawing down federal funds to ensure they have the nutrition needed to stay engaged and nourished after school. The After-School Meal Program has only been available since 2010, so there is ample opportunity in every state to increase access to these important nutrition resources. We have two amazing guest speakers joining us today who are going to share their experience with serving after-school meals, so we hope you walk away with some inspiration for this school year. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about what we will be covering today in our time together. So first, I will be giving a 101 of the program, and this will include the basics of after-school meals, a look at current participation, and then some key opportunities that we see in our work across the country. And like I mentioned, next we'll hear from two speakers who are serving suppers and snacks, which I am so excited to hear about. First, we will hear from Maria Ammerman from the Roseville area schools in Minnesota. And then next, we'll hear from Brooklyn Swyers from Operation Food Search, which is primarily operating in Missouri. So they will share an overview of their programs and some best practices that they have gathered from their time working on the programs. And like Steve mentioned, at the end, we will save time for questions. So if you do have any, feel free to use the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen. All right, next slide, please. So before we dive in and hear about all of the awesome work happening in these programs, I wanted to just start by setting the scene for why we think expanding access to after-school meals and snacks is so important. So we all have heard how important school meals are for keeping children nourished, engaged, and healthy during the school year, and that need does not disappear when the school bell rings at the end of the day. And after-school meals and snacks have many benefits. Most importantly, they combat hunger and food insecurity by providing a free meal and snack to children 18 and under at sites in low-income communities. They can also help support the overall operations for schools, meal sponsors, and after-school programs by providing reimbursement for meals and snacks served during the school year. This is especially important for those programs that may be paying for meals out of their program budget. The other thing I want to flag about this program is that it is flexible and can be adapted to fit your unique needs in the community, including the timing of when meals are served after school, the menu options, locations, and even the partners you work with. And last but not least, these programs help ensure children have the nutrition they need to stay engaged in after-school programming. Next slide. All right, so I wanted to just show a brief look at the history of after-school suppers and snacks, because I know it's always a little bit surprising to me that these programs have not been around as long as many of the other child nutrition programs. So there is a lot of opportunity to expand participation and increase awareness. So snacks through the NSLP became available in 1998. And then pilots for suppers were made available through different legislation vehicles beginning in 2000. By 2010, all states had the option to serve after-school suppers through the permanent expansion in the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act. So a lot has been accomplished in the last 13 years since that child nutrition reauthorization, but there is still a lot of room to grow. So as we discussed on the previous slide, there are two main programs that work to provide nutrition during the after-school hours, and that includes NSLP snacks and the CACFP After-School Meal Program. There are some key differences between these programs, and the focus of today's webinar is on the CACFP After-School Meal Program because of its wider reach and the option to serve more meals. But let's just highlight those key differences between the programs to start off with. So for NSLP snacks, which as a reminder has been available since 1998, this program is only available for school food authorities that are currently operating NSLP. For reimbursement, only snacks served after school on school days are reimbursable. And that also alludes to the next point here, which only snacks are reimbursable through this program. On the right side of the screen is an overview of the CACFP After School Meal Program. So unlike NSLP snacks, this is open to entities outside of the school food authorities. So this is where wider, broader sponsors can participate. For reimbursement, snacks and suppers served after the school day, as well as weekends and holidays during the school year, can be reimbursed. And this really does open up a key opportunity to provide meals during extended school breaks when we know that food insecurity can spike. And unlike NSLP snacks, this program, like I alluded to earlier, does include both suppers and snacks. So with that said, let's dive a little bit more into the CACFP After School Meal Program, which will be the focus of the rest of the webinar. So like I mentioned earlier, this program does provide up to one meal and one snack per day to children 18 and under, and meals can be served after school, on weekends, and during school holidays during the school year, which obviously excludes the summer vacation, which is when the summer food service program comes into effect. So sites are eligible to participate if they are in the attendance area of a school where at least 50% of the children are eligible for free or reduced price school meals. And unlike summer meals, if you work on that program, you can only use school data to determine eligibility for after school meals. You cannot use census data. So with all that said, if you are in an area that does not meet that 50% threshold, your sites can still participate in NSLP snacks by individually qualifying students. So the next requirement for this program is that there does have to be an enrichment or educational component included in the program in order to serve suppers and snacks. So examples of this can be mentoring and tutoring programs, school choir, debate or drama club. One thing I will flag here is that sports teams alone cannot participate in the after-school meal program. So these activities have to be regularly scheduled educational or enrichment activities in order to meet that requirement. Like with the other child nutrition programs, meal pattern components apply to the after-school meal program as well. And there are specific rules for meeting these requirements, which we don't have the time to go into today, but for a very broad overview, snacks and suppers must include grain, protein, milk, fruit, or vegetable. And suppers must meet 5 of these requirements and snacks must meet 2. So in addition to everything here on the screen, programs that want to serve after-school meals must also meet any state or local licensing, health, and safety requirements. All right, next slide, please. So if you are joining us today and you're completely new to after-school meals and you're considering being a sponsor, here is an overview of the expectations for operating the program. And I want to flag here that your state child nutrition agency will be able to share information about their training, answer any questions you have, help you get started, and really just be your best friend if you are interested in running these programs. So if you are looking to be a sponsor this year, you will have to attend your state agency's training. You will have to locate eligible sites. You will have to hire, train, and supervise staff. You will be arranging for meals to be prepared or delivered. You will be monitoring your sites, and then you will also be preparing claims for reimbursement. So let's actually talk a little bit about reimbursement for these meals and snacks on the next slide. So like with the other child nutrition programs, schools and sponsors that are operating this program are reimbursed for every supper and snack served, and these rates are adjusted annually. So for the upcoming 23-24 school year, those rates were just updated, I believe at the end of last month, and here are the updated rates here on the screen. So the free rate for a supper is $4.25, and for a snack, it's $1.17. And I think it's really important here to show how this reimbursement can really add up if you do operate the program. And I have a couple of models here to represent the range and how many children you may be reaching. So if your program is operating for 180 days, which is the typical length of a school year, and you're serving 300 children, so a bit of a larger program, you could be almost receiving $300,000 in federal reimbursement. For 100 children, that's around $97,000, and then for 50 children, that's $48,000. And of course, depending on your program and how often you operate, this could look different, but I think this is a good look at how that can add up if you are serving both a supper and a snack at your program. So one other thing that I will flag on that last reimbursement slide is just the fact that of this reimbursement, up to 15% can be used to support your administrative costs. All right, next slide. So every year, FRAC releases a data report looking at participation in the after-school nutrition programs, and we will be releasing our next report in October, which looks at last October's data, so October 2022, but let's take a quick look at participation in 2021. So what we found is almost 1.5 million children received an after-school supper in October 2021, which was a slight increase of around 40,000 students from the previous year. So the other data point that we have here is that one child received an after-school supper for every 18 children in low-income households who received a lunch through the National School Lunch Program. So I will just flag that this comparison is slightly skewed for this year. I'm sure everyone knows what was happening in October 2021. We were in the midst of the pandemic and all school lunches were available at no charge. So that comparison is a little skewed, but it's usually around 1 in 14 during normal years. And I think that just goes to show that there can be more done to make sure that more programs are serving after school suppers. All right, so I will be turning it over to our speakers in just a moment. And I know that was a lot of information to go through, but what I want to do is just highlight a few key opportunities that we see on the national level when we think about, reaching low-hanging fruit with after-school suppers and expanding access to these key programs. So the first thing, if you are already serving snacks through the NSLP program or CACFP, you could consider moving from snacks to suppers and even snacks to both suppers and snacks. So serving a 5-component meal can maybe seem intimidating, but the reimbursement for a supper is almost 4 times that of the snack, which we showed in the previous slide. So you can really meet that by adding 3 components to the snack that you already serve. And many programs have seen luck with what they call the super snack, which is a meal that has all 5 of the components needed for that meal reimbursement, but they are more snack-like items. So there's also a lot of opportunity to serve on weekends and holidays. And then if you are a school or a sponsor that maybe serves during the summer months and you're looking to start after school meals, programs often have success with using some of their popular items from summer or the school year and serving those after school. And that's great to reduce food waste for new programs since those meals have already been vetted. And then for schools who are looking to go to after school meals, which I'm very excited to hear from Maria on the webinar today, but where possible, prepping during the day and then really relying on the after school enrichment staff to help pick up the meals and serve the meals can help reduce the burden on your staff. And then the last thing that I'll mention on this slide before I go to my last slide is just the opportunity to partner with program providers in your community. So if you are a sponsor looking to expand to new sites, checking in with Boys and Girls and YMCAs and all kinds of different providers and partners to see what's happening and where programs may be providing their meals out of their own pocket. So one last opportunity that I'll leave you with before we get to our speakers is the recent key opportunity around out of school time programs. So through the American Rescue Plan, which was a COVID legislation, this legislation actually earmarked billions of dollars in funding to support summer and after school programs to help strengthen them, expand them, add new programs. And this is really important because, as we know, in order to serve after school meals, like I mentioned earlier, there does have to be an enrichment or educational component. So as these programs grow, so does the opportunity to serve meals at those existing sites. So almost every state has an out-of-school time network that is tracking this funding and working to expand access to after-school programs. So if you are looking for a new partner in your effort to expand some or after-school meals and snacks, this could be a really key opportunity to do that. So I would highly recommend, if you're looking to find the contacts in your state and learn more about how this funding is being used in your state, you can check out the afterschoolalliance.org, and we'll make sure everyone gets this information afterwards in the slides. But it's a key opportunity, and we want to make sure that any new program coming on board through this funding also knows about the opportunity to serve snacks and suppers. All right. So that was enough for me. We are going to go ahead and turn it over to our sponsors who are running these programs on the ground. So first, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Maria from the Roseville area schools to talk through what is happening in Minnesota. So Maria, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Clarissa. Good afternoon. As Clarissa mentioned, I am Maria Ammerman. I am the nutrition coordinator for Roseville area schools and St. Anthony New Brighton schools, which is in Minnesota. Next slide. Roseville area schools is a vibrant community. We serve about 8 metro communities that consist of first and second ring suburbs of the Twin Cities. We have over 10,000 students, about 16 sites. We are district area eligible, sitting at about an average of 50% free and reduced kiddos, with larger pockets of need at different sites across the district. We have over 82 languages other than English spoken at home. So we have a wide variety of tastes and preferences in our district that every year we're trying to meet those needs in different ways. And we also operate what I call the alphabet soup of federal nutrition programs. So we feed all summer through SFSP. We serve National School Lunch and Breakfast Program. We have a few sites that receive the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Grant. And of course, while we're here today to talk about after school meals through CACFP, which means that during the school year, our students have access to breakfast, lunch, and supper with us at all our sites. And we call supper super snack, as mentioned earlier. Next slide. So we definitely did not just jump into hot supper after school snacks. We've taken baby steps, just like most people, I think. So prior to 2018, we did after school snack through the National School Lunch Program. In 2018, we converted all our sites to at-risk supper through CACFP funding. And of course, we call that super snack. Those were all cold items. And just this year, we are converting all our sites to be serving a hot supper starting this fall. So that is our journey. We definitely did not just jump in right into that final red arrow. It took, I guess, 5 years to get to where we are. Next slide. One of our core values, of course, in our department is to decrease hunger in our communities. And so we're always looking for ways to increase our food offerings, both in variety and, of course, volume for our students. And so adding after school snack, after school supper fits naturally into this. Another reason we've looked into this is it supports on-site programming that already exists, which was already mentioned, but a lot of our on-site programming was paying for snack and supper, out of their budgets or out of their teachers' budgets or their own personal finances. And so if we can lift some of that weight from our district programming, that's a help for not only our students, but for our district. And then it's also a great win for our bottom line. And we know that nutrition departments and budgets are always counting pennies. And so really that increased reimbursement can be really pivotal from changing a department from operating in the red to the black, as we've talked about before with the increased reimbursement. And because you can do offer versus serve, you can still keep your food costs really low to really reap the benefits of that $4.50 reimbursement per meal. Next slide. So just a little bit about what worked for us. We, of course, have learned a lot. Like all, I'm sure, directors and departments can attest to, nothing ever works well the first time, it seems. But we did start very simple. We used all individually wrapped cold items on our menus. So this was bagels and sun butter, cheese sticks, maybe, IW sandwiches, cheese and crackers, things like that. We kept it very simple. We also utilized our commodity products to continue to decrease food costs and already using items that were already on our menus, already on our breakfast menus, already on our lunch menus. We weren't bringing up new things. So things like IW cranberries or raisins or NOI cheese sticks, any of those types of things. We're also really flexible in service mode. All our sites look a little different depending on what's going on in every site. So some of the things we had to think of is, will the sites unitize their meals? So will our staff package all the meals, put them in a big crate and put them in the cooler for the staff, after school staff to distribute? Will we train our students and staff on offer versus serve? Will they get to choose, their 3 out of their 5 components? Who's going to distribute the meals? Is it going to be our staff? Is it going to be after school staff? Is there a clerical staff that has time at the end of their day that's allowed in their contract? Every site looks a little bit different. And now we're just finally starting to kind of make standard operating procedures of what this should look like for the best for our students. We made, again, like very incremental changes. So our high schools, we adjusted staff time, moved some of their hours back a little bit towards the end of the school day. And the last couple of years, they've actually had a hot entree served, and we had our nutrition staff prepare it, serve it, and clean up. New this year at our elementary schools, we're adding 30-minute positions that work at the last 30 minutes of the school day. And the meals are already prepped hot by our nutrition services staff. And these 30-minute positions come, they are Serve Safe certified or have had food safety training. They do the meal service, the correct documentation, and cleanup. And adding that 30-minute position is the first time we've added to accommodate for these increased meals, but it's what's allowing us to have that hot entree, because we really want our students to have high quality hot food, knowing if this is their true supper, they deserve more than snacky foods. But that's taken some time to get to. Where we're headed is incorporating our local products and produce as possible. We have a really thriving farm to school program, but none of those products make our way onto our after school snack or supper programs. And I think that it could be a great way to incorporate our enrichment activities and our other after school programming to see some of those local products and produce on those menus. And then also what we really need to work on is our communication with building leadership. The kids that eat our meals know that they exist after school, but I know most of our students and probably a lot of our staff and leadership don't know we're offering it. And that's something that we need to look at of like, what can we do better? Who do we need to communicate with so that all kids at that school know that there is a hot meal at the end of the day that they are welcome to. We encourage them to eat, and it's free for them at no cost. So that's just a quick dive of what's working for us, and it looks different at every site. And of course, at the end of today, if you have any questions, I am happy to answer. Otherwise, Clarissa, back to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Maria, for walking through that transition within the school district. We're going to go ahead and turn it over to Brooklyn Swyers from Operation Food Search. But again, if you do have any questions, feel free to add them to the Q&A box. Brooklyn?
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction, Clarissa. I am the manager of child nutrition programs at Operation Food Search. I've been in this organization for the past 5 years. And Operation Food Search is a hunger relief organization that serves around 200,000 people every month in the bi-state region between Missouri and Illinois. And the way that we work is we try and focus on nutrition education and then innovative programs and meeting that immediate need while also trying to determine long-term solutions to solve hunger. So that's us. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we do divide our work into 3 categories. Really, that is, again, that meet the immediate need, build nutrition IQ, and champion change. Our program that we utilize CACFP through is our after-school refuel program. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. So what is after school refuel? Of course, this is our CACFP program that provides, as previously mentioned, a super snack to students immediately following school dismissal. Though it is not meant to displace or replace dinner, this light meal does provide an additional well-balanced meal to children to help to fuel their after school activities. And of course, if there are children who are not going to be receiving a meal between their lunch at school and their breakfast the next day at school, this is that perfect opportunity for them to get that additional nutrition for the day. So where do we operate? Our program is operated in areas with at least 50% or higher free and reduced enrolled students. Our focus is typically with partners who are not otherwise able to run the program without a sponsor. So for instance, we work with several libraries, the St. Louis County Library and the St. Louis City Public Library, and other programs who are offering after school programming, but just not typically at the school. Next slide, please. So we do operate as an unaffiliated sponsor, and how this works and really just means that we partner with outside organizations. Like I mentioned, those libraries, those organizations we provide the meals to, and they do the work of actually distributing the meals. We do assume all financial responsibility with working with these partners. And of course, the end result is that we do operate in several locations and we're able to serve more children in that way. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? So we utilize a vendor. Our vendor purchases, packs, and delivers ready-to-eat nutritious meals to our partners daily. These meals are unitized and chilled. The main reason for this is because, again, we're talking about operating in areas and locations where there's not a kitchen, there's not a microwave, there's really just access to a fridge, and being able to pull those out and offer it as a meal to children who are attending some form of after school activities at that location, but not in a typical school setting where they would likely have access to preparing hot meals or a school cafeteria. So our partnering organizations that we work with oftentimes, always are not paid to offer the meal service at their location. They operate after school refuel in kind, promoting the meal service and distributing the meals to their patients. And our partners are responsible for completing the daily record keeping and monitoring for food safety. OFS works with them to conduct the required training and making sure that they are fully aware of all of the program guidelines that are required to operate this program. And then really our main role is to maintain that relationship between our partners and DHSS. The Department of Health and Senior Services is who runs the CACFP program here in Missouri. And so how we work that out is we keep all of the records, conduct the monitoring visits, and then submit those claims to our state agency after receiving all of those files from our partners. Next slide, please. So some best practices that I have found in my time in this role is truly just seeking active partners. This is one of the best ways to implement a successful program, whether it's promoting the meal service or having a fun and engaging enrichment activity for kids. That's really how you get partners invested in this program and the kids that they're serving. We have found that partners who are engaging their patrons tend to see the kids coming back time after time and are able to, continue to run a successful program at their location. I also recommend that you strive to onboard year-round partnerships. This way you're able to provide a seamless service year-round for children, whether it's, on holiday breaks, summer breaks, and really that it translates into, great news for the kids, but also great news for sponsors, because that's less training, promotion, paperwork, and we'll call that a major win. Next slide, please. Another best practice that I would recommend is just encouraging all children to participate in the program. When all children participate, the stigma associated with meal programs dissipates. Along those same lines, scheduling the meal service around the activities and enrichment activities that you have going on versus, saying, come get a meal, that really helps to decrease that stigma. And so the service is really focused around the activity versus the actual meal. And since our sites are often drop-in locations, we also encourage our partners to utilize the share table versus serving second meals. By utilizing a share table, which is meant for unwanted items, you reduce plate waste, and it allows for children to receive extra items and receive that extra nutrition. Next slide, please. And then finally, I would just recommend setting clear guidelines. Obviously, CACFP does require a lot of paperwork and record keeping. And really that is the role that me and my team play, is, helping to make sure all of those records are up to date. And so when you set those clear guidelines with your partners, that's gonna make life easier for you and them. And so for us, some of the ways that we do this is, when we do our training, we make sure that our training truly engages our partners so that they're paying attention and know what the guidelines are, and that they're prepared for a monitoring visit, whether it's from our team or our local health department or the Department of Health and Senior Services. And some ways that we do this to just continue that training piece for our partners is to provide detailed cheat sheets or tutorials so that they can quickly reference those if they have any questions as they're going, versus, obviously they're always welcome to call us, but having that quick reference guide has been really key in making sure that everyone stays up to date on, what is required to offer this program. I personally do recommend unitized meals, especially in this type of programming. And when you're working with people who aren't well versed in food services, this makes life so much easier for them, in that they are able to quickly grab a meal, add a milk with it, and move on. And so we know that they're not missing any components and they're serving complete meals. And then, of course, when it comes to the actual record keeping, I highly recommend going paperless. We utilize paperless meal counts, delivery tickets, and things like that. We do have partners who do their attendance online and are able to submit all of that paperless. By doing it that way, it creates so much less hassle than dealing with actual paper forms, which makes, again, life easier on my team and our partners. And just like I mentioned in the last slide, when you provide clear guidance on and set defined timelines on when these paperwork items are due, it ensures that partners, have that expectation and are able to get these records to you on time and in a timely manner. And again, just when dealing with numerous sites, staying on top of their varying expiring inspections and such, that can be a huge hassle. So I just recommend that you keep some sort of reminder so that both you and your partners are on top of this paperwork and nothing gets missed. But really, that is me. So thank you guys for your time today. I truly appreciate it.
That was amazing, Brooklyn. Thank you so much for that thorough overview of what's happening at Operation Food Surge. And I think your point about how it can help strengthen year-round operations and build those partnerships, I think is something that we definitely hear as well. So was really excited to see that on your slide. Awesome. Alrighty. Well, I see some questions coming in, so we can go ahead and get to those. And then as we're going through these, if folks have other questions, feel free to keep adding them. But one that I see here in the Q&A is, what is the rationale for excluding sports as a CACFP qualifying activity? So I am not 100% sure about the history of it, but I know that it's always been the case that if it's only a sports team or sports activity alone, then that is not eligible for after school meals. So what I will say is that students who are part of a school sports team or a club, they can receive an after school snack or meal if it's part of a broad overarching educational or enrichment program offered by the school. So say there's mentoring or homework help or some kind of activity, and there's also a sports team happening, then those athletes can receive a meal. So I want to make sure that that was very clear, because it's not to say that if they're like athletes can't participate if meals are being served. It just can't be the only thing, because really what the goal is to have activities for all students to participate in. And the one thing that I would say too is that there actually is no requirement that the after school program tracks the specific activities that children are participating in and document that children are participating in those offered activities. So again, as long as one is offered, then the site is eligible to serve meals to all of the children that are, at the school or at the other facility. So I want to make that clear and just share that it is not, athletes are not completely excluded. It just can't be the only thing that's happening.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, when you're able to coordinate with, your directors of your sports and offering those meals right when the bell rings, you're able to catch them before they go on to their sporting event. And so that's one way that we have been able to operate and offer our programming to students that are attending sports as well.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Alrighty, well, I'm gonna flip around here and read a question from the chat first, because I think this is something that's really interesting. So the question is, the attendance area concept can be hard to get a handle on. Do you have a good way of describing this concept in more detail, or is there a tool to use to help illustrate it, thinking along the lines of an up-to-date school attendance boundary mapper? So I would love to hear from our speakers if you have any thoughts on this, but I know that this can be a little tricky because it's not like a census mapper where it's very clear defined lines. It could be a little more squishy. I know that some schools do have school boundary information, but I think my best advice would just be to reach out to the schools or your state agency if you are interested in a site. I mean, the way that I think about it is, if the site was like a house, where would that site go to school, if that makes sense? So like, where in that area, like what school would they go to, and is that school eligible for at that 50% threshold, which may not be the easiest way to look at it, but I think for the most part, I mean, to determine the attendance area, if there isn't a boundary map, I think just reaching out to your school or the state agency which has that information. But I'm curious, maybe for Brooklyn or Maria, do you have any other insight on this that would make it a little bit, yeah, I guess more tangible, or anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, we use census track that helps us really identify certain locations. We also, the way that our state agency works is, if you're trying to operate a program, identifying the nearest school, exactly what you said, Clarissa. And if that school meets that 50% free and reduced rate, typically we're able to operate there. So that's usually how we figure that out.
And I don't have anything additional to add to that. Yeah, reaching out to your state agency is where we would start.
Was muted. There was a question about the share tables and an allergy risk. So I don't know if Brooklyn or Maria, if you want to speak to this. So if a child picks something up from a share cart, what responsibility does the cafe school have? Yeah, interested in any thoughts if this has come up at all.
Yeah, so from our side, none of our products utilize any popular allergens. So, peanut butter, things like that. We also don't use pork, just for religious reasons. And so, knowing that up front, unfortunately, we have such a wide service area that we can't do special requests for our program at this time. So that's pretty clear for our people participating, and our partners know to mention that, there's no peanut butter. And yeah, so really we don't have any responsibility with that. It just being clear and upfront with it from the get-go.
Great. Awesome. Sorry, Maria, I saw you came off mute.
Yeah, I mean, very similar. We also, all our foods are void of the top 9, I guess now, allergens. And our students are also very used to share carts at breakfast and lunch. And so it operates just the same for them as they do during after school care. So we don't really have any concerns for those aspects. Probably the bigger question that gets brought up oftentimes by out of school time staff that are not nutrition services staff, is, especially after the pandemic, is just like keeping food safe, like clean. And so anything that is left on the share cart, maybe at the end of service or, the end of the lunch period or whatnot, is taken back and like cleaned and wiped down. If it's something that can be re-put on the line, or milk cartons, things like that. Fruit would obviously be re-washed, things like that. But that's usually more of our question, is concern more of germs, less about allergens.
Great, thank you. All right, and there was a question around how do we serve snacks to all students? We only have about 100 students enrolled in our program or after school tutoring. So as long as there is a program that is available to all students, you can serve, any child who comes, as long as the site is eligible, you would be able to provide meals to, any child who's stopping in for that. There can be drop-in programs, so it doesn't necessarily have to be enrolled. So I hope that answers your question. I think you also had a more specific question around funding, which may be better for offline conversation. But one question that came through for Brooklyn, Maria, maybe you could speak to this, is if you have you had any additional non-state funding to enable you to offer better food than can be afforded in the budget? I'm assuming through the Afterschool Meal Program. So are you able to cover all the costs through the federal funding for this program, or are you using other funding sources?
So for us, in the past, we have only utilized the reimbursement funding. However, I will say that this upcoming CACFP year, we are actually utilizing money that is either donated or grant funded to increase the quality of food, as the price of reimbursement has increased. That's wonderful. But so has obviously the cost of food, which is why that is increasing. And we do want to provide our kiddos with the best of the best. And so in order for us to do that and be able to sustain our program and our team, we do have to, or we're considering now adding that additional funding so that we can offer these higher quality meals.
Because we haven't added hardly any labor to support our meals and our services, we are able to cover all our costs with reimbursement. But I do think that comes from partially like it's integrated so much into our National School Lunch Program and Breakfast Day. Same thing with our staff prepping FFVP, fresh fruit and vegetable snack. That staff member might also be packaging, 100 additional veggies for the after school supper of that day. So it's so integrated, so that can save us like both labor and food cost. But we are able to, CACF continues to be a huge moneymaker for us.
Love to hear it. Awesome. All right. So the next question is, how do you manage demand, and do you know how many will stay for hot meals? So I think from your presentations that a lot of the programs are more maybe enrolled, or you have a good sense of how many children will be there, which I think for after school meals can generally be a little bit easier than summer with open sites. But curious, Brooklyn and Maria, if you want to speak to that a little bit about how you account for how many meals to have ready for sites.
So for us, of course, we are not utilizing the hot meals. However, our sites actually are more similar probably to summer because we do have a lot of drop-in. Though we do have, people returning each day, we do have high numbers where we'll see, spikes in our attendance. How we tend to combat that is just by averages, and asking our sites to have emergency meals on hand if this were to happen, and they were to have, double what they normally would serve. We do tend to operate to where they'll have some left over each day. By asking them to have those emergency meals, utilizing that share table to where, oh, these are $1 meals, but we have, maybe we can put something together for you based off of what's left on the share table. That's really how our team has combat that and making sure that we have enough meals.
We operate pretty similarly, of course, because we're on school sites. We do have a better idea of who's coming from each program every day, and just work with our food production records to estimate averages. We know our Monday days are higher, our Friday days are lower at some sites. And then we do have, even when we continue with our hot meals this school year, we will always have a stockpile of grab and go some things for people if we do run out. But because we're on site, and we know what programs operate on which days of the week and about how many students show up for those, we can do some pretty good forecasting.
Great, thank you. So there was, and maybe we'll have this be our last question, but the question is, can an at-risk site provide both snack and supper to the same group of children at the same time? So yes, a site can serve both supper and snack. I don't believe it is a best practice or allowed to serve them at the same time. I think there does have to be an amount of time that passes between them, which I can look that up and refresh everyone on that and myself. But I don't know, Brooklyn and Maria, do you have like a set time that you usually have elapsed between suppers and snacks?
Our state agency requires at least an hour between the times.
I think that's similar for us. We don't have anything served close enough together unless it's a school day or an out of school day. When we're serving, instead of supper, we'll be serving lunch and we'll do a snack instead.
Great. Yeah. And now that I'm remembering, I don't think there is a federal requirement of the length of time that has to elapse, but it does have to be a distinct meal service. So all that to say though, like if you do run a pretty short program, I think there can be flexibility. Like if you're only operating for an hour or 45 minutes, I mean, I think there can be a little flexibility to ensure that you can serve both those meals. But we can definitely make sure that gets shared in the materials afterwards. Alrighty. Well, if we did not get to your question, I think there were some that were maybe the same, so we can make sure that those get answered in the follow-up afterwards. But I want to go ahead and just start to wrap up today's webinar. So just wanted to thank Brooklyn and Maria again for joining us today and for sharing both the school perspective and also a nonprofit sponsor perspective, because I think it is so important to see how this program really can look so different depending on the communities you serve and the sites you serve. Yeah, really appreciate all those insightful comments. So I just wanted to leave folks with a few of our resources. So if you want to learn more about after school meals or have any questions, like I mentioned, we have our data reports. We have a newsletter that goes out monthly that includes key resources and grants and other opportunities. And then we have different models for making after school meals work. And two of them here are moving from snacks to suppers, and then also serving on weekends and school holidays, which can be a really key opportunity if you are already serving after school meals. So I think that's it. The next slide has our contact information. So please stay in touch. We hope you can join us for future webinars. And if you have any questions after we wrap up today, would welcome you to get in touch and would love to talk after school meals with anyone who is interested. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, and we will talk soon.